It's the dead of night. You switch on your torch, and instantly you become the target. One beam of light and it's over. A buried weapon, invisible in the dark. A German experiment from WW2 that hunted its hunters. What if one wrong beam of light could kill you? Tonight, we uncover a device so cunning, so stealthy, that even its makers kept it secret. A mine triggered not by pressure or tripwire, but by light. Welcome to a journey into the hidden side of weed. I'm your narrator, and in the next 40 minutes we'll explore the story of a light-triggered mine. How it was invented, how it worked, how it was deployed, and why very few people know about it today. We'll look at the night combat reality where this weapon emerged, the engineering breakthrough of a photo-triggered detonator, the first field use and its terrifying effect, the countermeasures developed to defeat it, the echoes of this idea in modern warfare. If you're fascinated by forgotten weapons, battlefield innovation, and stories beyond the textbook, subscribe now and click the bell so you won't miss our next deep dive into lost war technology. Let's begin. Night in WW2 wasn't just darkness, it was a second battlefield. Most operations stopped at sunset, but reconnaissance, sabotage teams, and forward patrols didn't have that luxury. They moved through forests, ruined towns, snow-covered fields, using only the faint silhouettes of terrain and the sound of their own breath as guides. There were no night vision goggles, no infrared scopes for the average soldier. If you wanted to see something, you had just two choices: feel it with your hands or shine a light. And shining a light, even for 1 second, meant announcing to the enemy, "I'm here." A flashlight beam could travel hundreds of meters in open terrain. Snipers were trained to fire at any moving light source. Artillery spotters scanned the night for glimmers. Units learned to cover even cigarette embers with their palms. In winter especially, with snow reflecting all illumination back like a mirror, light became a warning flare. Soldiers quickly understood a harsh truth. Darkness could hide you, but light could kill you. This fear of light created the perfect environment for a new kind of trap. German engineers studying battlefield reports realized something. Allied patrols heavily relied on flashlights for identifying obstacles. Combat engineers used light to inspect suspicious objects. Snowy and icy terrains created strong beam reflections. The result? A weapon that didn't need pressure, wires, or proximity. It just needed curiosity. A device that simply waited for someone, anyone, to make the one mistake almost every soldier made at least once: shine a light to make sure the path ahead was safe. The story of the light-triggered mine doesn't begin on the battlefield. It begins in quiet laboratories of the 1930s, where European engineers experimented with a curious piece of technology called the photoelectric cell. Early models were simple: a small glass tube with a light-sensitive surface. When light hit it, it created an electrical signal. To most engineers, it was the future of door sensors, street lamps, and industrial automation. But a few military researchers saw something else: a potential trigger. A way to activate machinery, or explosives, without a human hand touching anything. By the late 1930s, Germany was rapidly weaponizing new technologies. Optical sensors were tested for aircraft detection, bomb release automation, and perimeter alarms. Somewhere in that intersection, between experimentation and desperation, came the idea: what if a mine could respond to a beam of light, just like an eye? Engineers began prototyping devices built around glass photo elements shielded inside small metal housings. They discovered that with the right adjustments, a simple light pulse could close an electrical circuit reliably enough to trigger a detonator. Early prototypes were crude but promising. They worked in controlled environments, workshops, bunkers, test fields. But the battlefield was another story entirely. The biggest challenge: false activation. Snow glare, moonlight, artillery flares, even lightning could trigger the sensor. Engineers had to solve sensitivity tuning, shielding from ambient light, temperature stability in cold climates, and waterproofing the fragile glass element. Slowly, the design became more rugged. Certain models used a narrow slit window that only reacted to direct narrow beam light, the kind a soldier's flashlight produced. And with each test, the device became more dangerous, more selective, and more suited for real combat deployment. The weapon was ready. All it needed now was a battlefield that relied on flashlights. Winter was coming. At the heart of this weapon was deceptively simple engineering. Imagine, the device is buried just beneath the snow. On top of it, a tiny glass or metal window, invisible to the untrained eye. Inside, a photoelectric cell waits, connected to a detonator. When a beam of light, narrow, deliberate, enters the window, the photo element generates a current. That current closes a circuit, and the explosive charge goes live. There are no pressure plates, no tripwires, no human switch holder, just light. The Germans referred to it as a light trigger concept. The weapon only needed someone to shine a torch, inspect a device, or make sure the path was clear, and that one moment of illumination would become the trigger. But building a light-triggered mine in the field brings problems. First, sensitivity. The photocell must be tuned so it reacts strongly to a flashlight beam, but not to moonlight or snow reflection. Second, housing. The window must keep out snow, ice, and condensation. It must shield the sensor until that narrow beam hits it. Third, temperature. In winter, the cold slows down electronics, makes glass brittle, wiring contracts, batteries degrade. Engineers added heating elements or insulated compartments. Fourth, power and failsafe. The weapon needed a power source, batteries, capacitors, and a delay mechanism so that the soldier using a flashlight had no time to react. Many prototypes failed in harsh conditions, but the successful version used a narrow slit aperture and a filtering lens that only accepted direct light from a small angle. A perfect mimic of a soldier checking something with his torch. Picture the scene. A nighttime patrol moves over snowy terrain. A soldier stops near a suspicious mound, turns on his flashlight, aiming its beam at what he suspects is an obstacle. The beam enters the slit. Inside, the photocell responds. The circuit closes. Silence for a fraction of a second, then explosion. The blast rockets upward or explodes at ground level, depending on the design. The result, almost instantaneous destruction. The soldier never had time to fire or take cover. Engineers designed the mine to be passive until illuminated. In many cases, the only sign was the faint lens glare, and seconds later, destruction. It's a weapon built around human behavior, shining a light to inspect, turning one of the most basic soldier actions into a death sentence. The first light-triggered mines weren't deployed everywhere. They appeared in specific environments where soldiers were most likely to use flashlights: dense forests, ruined urban streets, snow-covered fields with poor natural visibility, and temporary defensive positions the Germans expected to abandon quickly. Winter fronts, especially in Eastern Europe, became an ideal test ground. Snow, darkness, and chaotic patrol routes created the perfect stage for a mine that waited for a flashlight beam, quietly, patiently. Reports from Allied engineers describe an eerily similar sequence each time. A patrol spots something unusual: an object, a mound of snow, a piece of metal. Someone kneels down, switches on a small hand torch, and tries to illuminate the shape. A narrow beam hits the slit window. The mine wakes up and detonates instantly. The blast is often upward-oriented, designed to disable the person inspecting it, not to take out an entire squad. Many survivors described it the same way. It didn't respond to movement. It responded to curiosity. At first, Allied units didn't believe such a device existed. Mines triggered by light? It sounded like a field rumor. Another booby-trap ghost story. But after a series of identical nighttime incidents, combat engineers started noticing a pattern. Flashlights were the common denominator. Soon, specialized demoning teams began investigating wreckage from exploded devices. What they found shocked them. A small photoelectric cell, shielded inside a hardened casing, connected to a detonator. The weapon was real, rare, but real, and its existence changed nighttime operations permanently. From that point on, Allied manuals began warning: do not illuminate suspicious objects. Use touch or shadow detection instead. A mine that reacts to light doesn't just kill, it changes behavior. Once Allied units realized that shining a flashlight could trigger an explosion, every patrol, every engineer, every scout felt a new kind of pressure. Darkness was no longer a mere inconvenience. It became a trap. Soldiers described an immediate psychological shift: the fear of illumination, the fear of their own instincts, the fear of doing something they had done thousands of times, simply checking what was in front of them. The battlefield became a place where even looking could get you killed. Nighttime missions grew slower. Patrols would freeze whenever something reflective glinted in the distance. Engineers crawled, feeling surfaces with their hands, refusing to use light even when it was the only sensible thing to do. Some squads developed improvised rules. Only one assigned man carried a flashlight. Flashlights faced the ground, never forward. Light was used only behind cover, never in the open. The psychological toll was enormous. Soldiers talked about the mine that punished curiosity, which created an atmosphere of hesitation, dangerous hesitation, in high-stress situations. The mine didn't need to be widespread to be effective. Even rumors of such a device spread panic. Every unexplained nighttime explosion became suspect. Every glint of metal could be a trap. The result was strategic. It made Allied forces less confident in their own tools. Without light, navigation slowed. Without light, object identification became guesswork. And without light, communication became dangerous. A soldier couldn't signal, couldn't direct, couldn't inspect equipment easily. In the cold, dark landscapes of WW2s, where nerves were already stretched thin, the light-triggered mine became a quiet, psychological weapon, one that rewired soldier instincts and made the night itself feel hostile. When the first investigations began, Allied engineers weren't sure what they were even looking for. A mine triggered by light left behind very little intact material. Most components, the sensor, the wiring, the housing, were blown apart. But eventually, fragments began to connect into a pattern. Small pieces of glass, curved metal shielding, and scorched fragments of photosensitive elements. Engineers realized they weren't dealing with a standard charge. They were dealing with a trap that punished illumination itself, and countermeasures had to be invented from scratch. Once the threat was confirmed, the first countermeasure was simple. Stop using flashlights in the open. Manuals quickly changed. Patrols were trained to approach suspicious objects from the side, not head-on. Soldiers began creating shadows deliberately, using their own bodies, rifles, or even helmets to block lines of light before checking equipment or terrain. Engineers adopted a new principle. If you must shine light, shine it from behind cover. This slowed operations drastically, but it saved lives. To replace the lost sense of vision, new inspection tools emerged. long wooden probes, hooked rods for lifting objects from a distance, fabric flags on sticks to detect hidden wires or slits, and reflective mirrors used at an angle to redirect daylight indirectly. Search by shadow became a real technique, using dim shapes instead of direct beams. These methods looked primitive, but they worked. As reports spread, specialized teams were trained specifically to deal with optical traps. They studied how snow refracts light, how lenses react under debris, how to approach potential sensors without exposing an angle of illumination. Most importantly, they learned that even a single reflection from a knife blade, a belt buckle, a frozen puddle could be enough to trigger a sensitive device. Night combat became a discipline of control of movement, of noise, and especially of light. These countermeasures didn't eliminate the danger, but they reduced the mind's psychological grip on the battlefield. After the war, most light-triggered mines were never found intact. They were small, fragile, and designed to destroy themselves on activation. But as Europe rebuilt, clearing teams occasionally uncovered unusual fragments buried in frozen soil or rubble, pieces that didn't match any standard anti-personnel mines. A few had remnants of a glass slit window. Others contained metal compartments clearly meant for optical components. These discoveries finally provided physical confirmation that the device was more than frontline rumor. Today, only a handful of surviving examples exist, most of them incomplete. Some museums display a corroded casing, others a partially intact photocell assembly. Curators note how unusual these devices are. No pressure plates, no tripwires, no mechanical triggers. Just an optical path and an electrical circuit, a concept far ahead of its time. Many exhibits have small signs reading, "Operation Method, Optical Activation." Even experts find the simplicity elegant and unsettling. Post-war engineers studying the fragments noticed something crucial. The weapon wasn't just a mine. It was one of the earliest examples of a battlefield optoelectronic trigger. This placed it in the same technological lineage as early infrared alarms, beam break sensors, laser trip systems, and modern optical fuse. In other words, the light-triggered mine wasn't a dead end. It was a prototype of future generations of detectors. With the war over, most records were destroyed, lost, or classified. Light-triggered mines were produced in small numbers and deployed in limited areas, making them statistically rare compared to millions of standard mines. Many historians simply overlooked them. Others dismissed them as misreported incidents or battlefield myths. Only in recent decades, through fragment analysis, declassified reports, and engineer interviews, has the story been reconstructed. A weapon built for darkness almost disappeared into it. The light-triggered mine was never mass-produced. It didn't reshape the war, and yet, its DNA survived. Engineers studying its concept after WW2 realized that using light as a trigger wasn't just unusual, it was groundbreaking. The idea evolved, transformed, and resurfaced in places most people never associate with wartime prototypes. Everything from modern motion detectors to perimeter alarms to simple laser brake beam systems can trace a part of their lineage back to WW2 experiments with photoelectric triggers. By the 1960s, optical triggers appeared in civilian technology. Automatic doors, warehouse counters, and early burglar alarms. They all use a simple principle. A beam of light is broken, or suddenly appears, and a circuit reacts. This is the same principle that powered the mine. Light, a sensor, electrical pulse, activation. Except now, instead of triggering explosives, it turned on lights, alarms, and cameras. On the battlefield, the idea resurfaced in more advanced forms. infrared beam traps, optical fuse, early laser-triggered security systems, and sensor arrays designed to detect movement by reflecting light. Modern laser tripwires, the kind used in special operations or base security, operate on a principle strikingly similar to the WW2 device. The difference: today, systems are far more precise, resistant to weather, and tuned to ignore background light. But the core idea remains unchanged. Use light to detect presence and decide what happens next. In a way, that obscure WW2 mine didn't just vanish. It quietly evolved and became part of technologies millions of people use today without even noticing. So, what do we make of a weapon like this? A mine so rare that many soldiers never saw one. A device so specialized that it barely survived the war in physical form, and yet so innovative that its principle lived on for decades in technologies all around us. The light-triggered mine is a reminder that WW2 wasn't just fought with tanks, rifles, and artillery. It was a vast laboratory of ideas, some brilliant, some brutal, some forgotten. And sometimes, the most fascinating inventions are the ones that appear only in the dark and disappear just as quietly. If this deep dive made you look at technology a little differently, if it made you wonder what other forgotten weapons, experiments, or battlefield innovations are still hiding in old reports and ruined bunkers, then you're exactly the kind of person we make these videos for. Subscribe to the channel, because next week we're uncovering another piece of wartime engineering that almost vanished from history. And believe me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.